Everyone and their grandma knows about Cthulhu, the great Cthulhu, the monster with the tentacles coming out of the sea. You heard about him from movies, video games, or somewhere else. You have to heard about him, or else you wouldn't have clicked on the video. But what is it really? Where does he come from? He actually comes from a book written by H.P. Lovecraft in the summer of 1926. And today I'm gonna be telling you a little bit about it, explaining, going along the story, why it is good, and there are some points that are not that good. Before we start, I'd like to tell you about the literature, where I read it. First, I read the Croatian version of it. It's not that thick, actually. It is just a couple of stories inside of this version. But then that was like half a year ago. But then I had to reread it just to make this video, and I reread it in English from this version. It is by Burning Tree, Flaming Tree. I do not know. Flame Tree Publishing. Yeah, it is a really good version of all of his stories. But although I would put some other stories inside of it, it is not complete. It cannot be complete, because if it were, just to show you, you see the text, it's really small. It is, he wrote a lot of stuff, so it is really hard to put it inside of one book. It's physically hard. So yeah, I would have put some different ones inside of it, but still, this is, I think, the best version you can buy if you want to buy the book. But his stuff is, I'm pretty sure, in the public domain anyway, so you can read it online without a problem. I'm gonna put it here for the time being, and we will get into our next point. So what did this book actually accomplish? It inspired a lot of people. It is his most famous work, but it's not his favorite book, which I agree with him. He wrote a lot of better stuff, but still people like this for some reason the most, and that's why I'm making this video. I will go into detail about some other things of it in other videos, but for this one I'm just gonna stick to the Call of Cthulhu. So it is written a little bit differently than your standard novel. It is written from the perspective of the narrator. It is actually, so the most simple way to explain it would be that the narrator is the protagonist as well. So you're reading it as if you have picked up a piece of paper from like a bundle of documents from somebody's desk, and you're reading it. That's the best way. It's like somebody's left diary. That would be the best way of explaining it. And it is separated into three different parts. It is the Horror in Clay, the Tale of Inspector Lagrasse, and The Man is from the Sea. Disclaimer before we start: there is a lot of racism in the story, and I do not agree with it at all. It, like I said, it was written in 1926, and he was born in a time of rampant racism in America, but that still doesn't justify it. He still can be judged for it, because there were people who were working against it, and he was actively, spreading hatred, which ties into another thing that bothered me about him, which was his intellectual elitism, I'd say. He was really, he didn't really consider, but while you read it, it's like he doesn't consider, a little bit dumber people. That I wouldn't even say, like, people who are not scholarly or scholars, that don't read books, or that are not fucking versed in, I don't know, astrology or something. Like, they're not as human as the other people, and which really bothered me, since the guy was, I'd say, a complete nut job. But nonetheless, just so you know, I do not agree with it at all, and I think he is a pretty bad person for doing it. So the book starts off with, just for I'm not gonna be reading the entire thing. If you think that, no, I'm just gonna be reading a couple of parts from it because it has to be read. There is no other way to describe it to you for how it is written. And the first part and the last part, in my opinion, of a book, if I'm trying to explain it to you, should be read, just so you can get the tone from the start of it, and the final message you get from the book. So it starts off, chapter one, the horror in clay. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. And it was not meant that we should voyage far. So it starts off with a strong note, just setting you into what he's best at, just describing vast infinities. It's not like even one infinity, it's like infinity times 100, because his all of his books are marked by his insane world building with these horrible things that humans cannot do anything about. So I have written down the next part. It is really a handful to remember. It starts in the winter of 1926 to 1927 with the death of the protagonist's great uncle, George Gamal Angle, Professor Emeritus. I'm not familiar really with the titles. Of Semitic languages in the Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. He was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions. When he returned from a Newport boat, he was pushed by this, as quoted I quoted it from the book. But his death was actually attributed to, the doctors actually attributed it to heart failure, complications with his heart, because he went up a hill, which doesn't really make much sense, but that is part of the story as well. He died a childless widower, so all of his possessions were sent to his nephew, our protagonist, our narrator, where he moved all of the boxes to his headquarters in Boston, where he put all of the boxes, and he opened it to find a bunch of documents and a bas relief. If you're wondering what the bas relief looked like or what a bas relief is, it's basically just a chiseled piece of old stone. And it looked like this. It is described as a rough rectangle less than an inch thick and about 5 by 6 inches in area. Yielded simultaneous pictures of an octopus, a dragon, and a human caricature, which is where we get our famous Cthulhu look, because you have to have a dragon by its wings, its octopus head, and its body that resembles a human. A pulpy tentacle head had surmounted a grotesque and scaly body with rudimentary wings. Behind the figure was a vague suggestion of a cyclopean architectural background. So, in layman's terms, it's just, a big mountain, just something, it's like a giant cliff or something behind him on that piece of stone. So the main document in his papers was separated into 1925 Dream and Dreamworks of H.A. Wilcox and the narrative of Inspector John R. LeGrasse. First off, the manuscript starts with Anthony Wilcox, a sculptor, bring in a fresh sculpture of this bas relief that we just talked about to the professor, the narrator's uncle, Angles. Angles actually knew Wilcox because he came from a prominent family and he was a sculptor, a quite famous one, although he was not liked by his peers because he described himself as physically sensitive and had strange dreams from a young age. There was an earthquake before the day actually, he brought the bas relief, and he just wanted to ask Engels for his opinion because he got this dream that he had to just make a bas relief out of sculpture it, and he didn't know what it was. He just had it in a dream once, and he made that thing resembling our famous monster. So when Engels made sure that Wilcox didn't know what he was talking about. It was just something he dreamt and brought him freshly made. He told him as well, Wilcox told Engels that he had dreams of big cyclopean cities filled with green ooze. I actually wrote here as well that he heard a voice from the deep that wasn't a voice but a chaotic sensation say, Cthulhu Stagn. It is impossible to read that stuff because it's F-H-T-A-G-N. Stagn. You cannot say it in any other way. And as well, actually, fun thing, Lovecraft didn't pronounce it Cthulhu. He actually pronounced it Kalulu, but I don't want to do that. So I'm just gonna keep calling him Cthulhu. He knew so that he didn't know anything about his dreams, but that he just kept hearing this Cthulhu and this word as well, being said in his dreams all of the time, with this half voice, half sound that was more of a feeling than a sound. So what Engels told him was, you should report every day to me and tell me about your dreams, although there is a gripe I have with this. Why would he go to a guy who's like an expert in Semitic languages? Why would he go to the guy and ask him about his dreams? And then the guy was like, oh yeah, I'm interested. Can you just, tell me more about it? Come every day to my office and tell me about it. He was like, yeah, I'm totally gonna do that. Instead of going to like a psychiatrist, maybe it was because of it was normal at that time. I actually don't know. But it's kind of weird because he was scared of being put in a mental institution or something, or tarnishing his family's name. I honestly don't know. It doesn't say, but he agreed to come and visit him every day. Until on March 23rd, he failed to appear in Engels's office, and he was having more vivid dreams. He was actually dreaming now of a monster that was miles high that resembled the bas relief he had made. On the 2nd of April, he got better and didn't actually remember anything had happened. And that was basically it. He didn't remember his delirium. Like, he suffered a seizure as well in that time. But he didn't remember anything. It was over. And that's where the document ends. But there are some newspaper clippings that he found as well that were tied into the entire story. It was in the period from March 23rd to April 2nd, the period of Wilcox's delirium. Men of science were affected by the same kind of fever, but to a less degree, although artists and poets were more affected. So a large portion of the dreams was from the 28th of February to the 2nd of April, the same time that Wilcox had his fever and his delirium as well. A lot of them had the same dream. They had the dream of a great big nameless thing and the half sound calling them. To the point even that an architect went, I'm pretty sure he was in London if I'm not mistaken, I forgot, I'm not gonna check, went violently insane and died a couple of months later. So that was the first part of the story. So what we know, just to recap, Engels was looking for the looking into a matter of Wilcox's delirium, where he dreamt about strange stuff, and that coincidentally everybody, let's say physically sensitive, psychically sensitive, I'm sorry, people were really affected at the same period of time, and that something was amiss. And now we get to the second part of the document, the tale of Inspector Legrasse. So, the second part is about a meeting the American Archaeological Society had in 1908. It says that to them came a police inspector named John Raymond Legrasse. He traveled all the way from New Orleans to ask the society in itself about a sculpture. He had a little sculpture with him. He found it during a raid on a voodoo cult in a swamps outside New Orleans, and all the stories that the cult members told him, he didn't really believe because they all sounded like lies and just religious nonsense. So this part I'm actually gonna read because we get the first real description of Cthulhu and where most of it is based, what it is based off on. The figure, which was finally passed slowly from man to man for close and careful study, was between 7 and 8 inches in height, and of exquisite artistic workmanship. It represented a monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and fore legs, a long, narrow wings behind. This thing, which seemed instinct with a fearsome and unnatural malignancy, was a somewhat bloated corpulence, and squatted evilly on a rectangular block of pedestal covered with undecipherable characters. The tips of the wings touched the black edge of the block. The seat occupied the center, whilst the long curved claws of the doubled up crouching hind legs gripped in front edge and extended a quarter of the way down towards the bottom of the pedestal. The cephalopod head was bent forward so that the ends of the facial feelers brushed the back of huge forepaws which clasped the croucher's elevated knees. This we don't need anymore. So all of the members admitted that they didn't know anything about the statue. They were baffled. It was completely alien. Nobody had seen something like it, except for one, Professor William Channing Webb, who has actually seen a thing exactly like that while he was moon hunting in Iceland. And he came across a tribe of degenerate Eskimos, I'm quoting this from the book, who worshipped a bas relief with the identical caricature that was put before them in a form of a statue, but on a bas relief, so like a stone plate. And the other Eskimos that lived there, they were like, what the fuck? I don't know what those guys are doing. We just don't want to have anything to do with them. You go look. And they just told them, yeah, the religion, completely a mystery. We don't know. They just dance around fires when the polar lights, aka Aurora Borealis, is there. They're doing like human sacrifice and all of those things we don't agree with. And when Legrasse and Webb compared the things that were chanted there, they both came to the agreement that it was chanted I'd like to try and pronounce it, but it's impossible because the English, it's made up. He made it up, so there is no point. And Legrasse had one point in advance of Professor Webb, for several among his mongrel prisoners had repeated to him what all their celebrants had told them those words meant. this text is given ran something like this. So it's a translation from this entire sentence I just told you that makes completely no sense. In his house at Relath, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. So, nacht Cthulhu Relath tagen. In his house at Relath, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming. So the men of science were actually intrigued because it was normal, it's their field and they have never heard about it, and they wanted to hear about it, so they pressed Legras for more details about his experience with the voodoo cult, to which he said that in 1907 they got a summons to a swamp outside of New Orleans where a couple of squatters couldn't bear it any longer, that there was a voodoo tribe next to them. There were people missing, and that it was just unbearable, and that the police had to come and intervene. 20 policemen, guided by a squatter, got into the squatter's settlement and could hear a distant sound of tom-toms. The squatter didn't want to approach the distant sounds, so they stayed back and the policemen pressed ahead. So there were horrible things said about the region, that there were malignant forces and things older than the Indians themselves. And as the policemen approached a distant red light and the sound of tom-toms, they could hear again that dreadful sound. It sounds like I'm speaking backwards, doesn't it? So when they came close enough, they could see the orgy. It was actually an orgy itself. 4 policemen lost balance and one fainted, with all others stood hypnotized with horror. Around 100 cultists were all nude, dancing around a bonfire in whose center was a stone monolith, and on top, on the monolith, was the statuette. The desecrated bodies of the missing squatters were hung upside down around the bonfire. So it was this... These policemen came and they're like, it was so disgusting. The entire thing was so disgusting and put them off so much that they just stood there. They couldn't say anything, but the entire thing was just a couple of seconds, and Burke came first and they came and confronted the tribe. So, and one person who was on the side of the police, a certain Joseph D. Calvez, has noted that he saw a white mass with red eyes fly away in the distance while that was happening, which ties in, I didn't say it earlier, but there were rumors about these white things that come and take people and brutally murder them and eat them and desecrate their bodies. And he says he saw one in the distance. The police killed 5, wounded 2, and captured 47 out of the roughly 100 of them. And the next part is really disgusting because I'm gonna put it here on screen if you're gonna read it. You don't have to, it means nothing, it just describes what was there in the orgy, but it is really it's just bottom feeder shit. It's disgusting, but I'm not gonna dwell on that, he already did. Later they started interrogating all the prisoners they had captured. So most of them they deemed mentally insane in the end and sent them to different mental institutions. And 2 of them they actually just hanged because they found them sane enough. The killed people, the killed squatters, the police were most concerned about, they never actually said anything about them. They just say that the black winged old ones came out of the woods and did that they had nothing to do with it. But the biggest thing that they found out was from an old man named Castro. He was actually pretty well traveled and he has seen a lot of things. He said he was sitting in the mountains of China with some immortal Chinamen, and that they told him the truth about the entire world, that humanity is actually just one of the residents of this planet, that there were eons before there were other residents who were on this planet, and that they were a lot different from us humans. These were the old ones, they called them. Those were deities. Actually, Cthulhu was the main deity on this planet. It was his world. He had his army. There were other things, other. Later, you find out in other books how they looked like. But basically, you have to imagine these nasty things that ruled the planet. But they all died. But they didn't really die. They actually are still in their cities, who are now, for the most part, somewhere in the Pacific and underwater. You could still find them somewhere, he said, but they're sleeping, they're dead and sleeping, and waiting for one day. They influence mankind's dreams, and by those dreams, they started their own immortal cult because they recruit people to try and find them and make them wake up. So they have these people who have infiltrated every aspect of humanity, be it politics, be it this, be it that, who are trying to wake up this monstrosity, this miles high thing, this elder god who is sleeping somewhere in his city in the Pacific. And they are trying to bring basically an end to humanity, because the only people alive will be those who are actually brought him back, if they will be alive. The statues, not the one that Wilcox made, mind you, the bas relief that he got from his dream, but these ones that they found in Legras found, and the other professor, I forgot his name, saw in Iceland, were actually from another planet, because these creatures are not even from this world. They came from the stars. When the stars are right, I forgot to mention that. When the stars are right, they can travel from galaxy to galaxy, from planet to planet. They can basically do anything they want. And when the stars will be right, the cult, he said, will find Cthulhu. When all the stars aligned, he will find him, not he, but his cult will find him, and they will waken him up so he can rule the world again. And with that, I'm gonna end it with, that is not that which can eternal lie, and with strange eons even death may die, which came from the Necronomicon, a fictional book in his stories that was written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazard. Actually, a fun thing, now it was pretty serious, the thing I was saying, but a fun fact, the name Abdul al-Hazard actually means nothing. Usually Arabian names have like meaning behind them. They're like sentences when translated, like the son of blah 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 and that kind of thing. Or God's eternal glory. I don't know exactly, but this one is just made up to sound Arabian. The protagonist, now we have forgotten actually that he exists at this point. The narrator chimes back in. He says, "This is the end of the document," and he actually goes now out of his way to go to Wilcox. He finds him again, and to make sure that everything that he read in the documents was actually true. So he goes to his house, and not his house, he lives in an apartment complex, if I'm not mistaken. But he comes inside and asks him, like, is that true? And he makes sure, yeah, the Wilcox doesn't know anything about the cult. He doesn't know anything about Cthulhu. He knows nothing. He just had the dreams. He kept on dreaming, just hearing those words from the half voice repeated from him from the depths of his mind, from doesn't know where, from the underground. Cthulhu Thagen, Cthulhu Thagen. And he still, the protagonist is still kind of just like he's a scientist. He's like, yeah, I don't buy this bullshit. What elder gods? Fuck you. And he just leaves and says, yeah, Wilcox probably heard it somewhere and he just remember it without even knowing that he remembers it. And so he goes to Legras, where he finds him, and he like confirms the entire thing. And he tries to find old Castro, but he has long passed. And the protagonist is still oblivious. He's still, yeah, this is bullshit. I don't buy it. He's just mad. The old man's mad. But he's intrigued. And he has figured something out. His uncle wasn't just killed by accident, that it was actually a murder. Because he uncovered something that he shouldn't. He knew too much. And at this time, he is thinking to himself, yeah, I have dug around quite a lot, and I'm pretty sure I know too much as well at this point, so I'm gonna see it to the end. I'm gonna give in, and I'm gonna see it to the end, and I'm gonna find out what is actually happening. So he does, and that is the end of the second chapter. So the third part is called The Madness from the Sea. It is our protagonist finding a newspaper clipping in a museum he is visiting from the newspaper Sydney Bulletin, dated April 18th, 1925. And the headline reads, Vigilant arrives with helpless armed New Zealand yacht in tow. One survivor and dead man found aboard. Tales of desperate battle and deaths at sea. Rescued seaman refuses particular or strange experience. Odd idol found in his possession. Inquiry to follow. Then it starts explaining that there was a ship called Emma, who was a trading ship just sailing through the Pacific. And they got attacked by another ship who was called Alert. It describes there were half castes and Kanaks on it, which is again a completely disgusting way of describing it. You didn't have to do that, but there were pirates basically on it, just tribal people, wild people on it, as he describes it. It was known that the Alert was a horrible ship and it got into mischief, and they shot at the Emma, but the Emma managed to board with all of his crew the ship and take it over. And what happened is the first two people in charge of the ship died, and the person who was in charge of the ship now was a man named Gustav Johansen. He was a Norwegian sailor. Then, after they do not know what happened to the crew, there was actually a crew, some of them survived, and there was quite a bit of them. They don't know what happened to them. The newspaper doesn't know. But they know that what happened when another ship came into tow, they found the derelict of the ship. It was completely destroyed, but it was still floating somehow. They found Johansen on the ship with one of his dead crewmates on it. He was half insane at the time, half delirious, and the only thing he had in his hand was an idol. And you know what kind of statuette idol I am talking about. So now it's really weird that on the other side of the planet there is this man holding a statue of Cthulhu, who our protagonist was so searching for, to find meaning behind it, to actually uncover the truth, that he thinks about it and actually comes to a conclusion that there was an earthquake between the March 1st and February 28th. And actually, the same, when it says in the Sydney Bulletin, the same happened in New England, where he is. I'm pretty sure he's in New England. I forgot. There's somewhere. Rhode Island. Yeah, there's somewhere. And artists and poets on the other side of the planet started having vivid dreams about Cthulhu, which happened again in the same time period, which was really weird. On the 23rd of March, the dreams became more vivid and images of a giant monster's pursuit started appearing. On the 2nd of April, there was a storm and all dreams ceased, and the siege of mankind's soul the siege on mankind's soul, I'm quoting that, has stopped. The protagonist then normally goes to Australia, to Auckland, to search for Gustav Johansen, but to his disappointment, he is not there. He moved with his wife back to his home in Oslo in Norway. But the sailors there said that they knew him and that his yellowish hair turned completely white after the incident. Then he goes to Sydney to actually find the Alert, the ship that they boarded, and he sees that it is actually still intact, that they refitted it to be a commercial vessel, and goes to a museum then to see the statue, and he just looks at it and he's like, yup, that's the one. Just then to go to Oslo and search for Gustav Johansen, but when he gets to Oslo, the door gets opened by his mourning wife dressed in all black. She says that he's dead, that he died not long after they returned back to Norway. But what had happened is she believes that some person, while he was walking through a narrow street, threw a stack of papers on him and killed him instantly. And he left with him it is like a diary, basically. It's just pieces of paper retailing what happens in basic English. It's actually bad English because the author explains it, so Lovecraft explains it as he wanted to protect his wife from not knowing it, but he had to get it off his chest, so he wrote it in English. Then the protagonist takes it and transcribes the events that happened. So in this part, the protagonist actually transcribes, because it's in poor English. He retells what's written in that diary. He tells us that when it's just a retelling, again, it's a retelling in a retelling, which is kind of insane. It is how Johansen described the events that had happened. So in the time, they just went normally to do their trade route, and they got attacked by the Alert, and then it started raining. Awesome. Just as I'm getting to this part. And then he went back to they tried navigating, but they couldn't really navigate, so they stumbled upon this island. But it wasn't actually an island. It was an age-old city. It was the most disgusting thing they have ever seen. It's made out of stones. It's full of green ooze, algae, everything. It has risen from the sea, they said, and they just boarded. They went on the island because they had nothing else to do. They were all stranded, so they went and explored it a little bit. In the middle of it, there was a big citadel that the author then here says it was the not the author, the protagonist says it was the tomb of the great big Cthulhu that the sailors didn't know yet. So they went to the big citadel to find a. But while he was walking there, he's describing it. You should read it to actually appreciate what how well his world building is in this part, especially how he goes through it, how all of the symmetry there everything is non-Euclidean, everything is wrong. There is nothing that makes sense there. It's beyond human comprehension, the architecture itself. And then he goes to then the sailors go to the citadel. They try and open it. They described it as this great big barn door, and then they accidentally open it. They accidentally opened it, and out comes this monster thing, miles high thing, and they're just looking at it. They cannot comprehend it. It's there is a big stench coming from it. It's rising, so it does, the way it's rising, it doesn't make sense. It makes no sense. It's not from this planet. It's not fathomable. And this is the I have to read this. This is the best part, if you ask me, of the story. It's where actually the most famous quote comes from. Poor Johansen's handwriting almost gave out when he wrote of this. Of the 6 men who never reached the ship, he thinks 2 perished of pure fright in that accursed instant. The thing cannot be described. There is no language for such abysms of shrieking and immemorial lunacy. Such eldritch contradictions of all matter, force, and cosmic order. A mountain walked or stumbled. God! What wonder that across the earth a great architect went mad and poor Wilcox raved with fever in that telepathic instant. The thing of the idols, the green sticky spawn of the stars, had awakened to claim his own. The stars were right again, and what an age-old cult had failed to do by design, a band of innocent sailors had done by accident. After vigitillions of years, great Cthulhu was loose again and ravening for delight. So after that, they all ran back. 2 or 3 people, I forgot now, got swept up by the monster itself. He just grabbed them. Another guy, while they were running back to the ship, got swallowed by the geometry actually of the city, which is a fascinating concept in itself. He just got eaten by the city itself, by some non-Euclidean horror. Then the Britain and Johansen got back to the boat, and they tried to start the ship as fast as they could. There is this Cthulhu started like chasing them. He got out, he started crawling on the city and was giving chase to them. He didn't want to let them escape. They started the engine full throttle. They went into the unknown just to escape this monstrosity. But Cthulhu slid into the water and he started backstroking his way to them, and he was catching up. So Bridget looks back and he goes completely insane. He starts laughing. He cannot take it anymore and he just starts laughing. He's lost his mind completely just by looking at this thing. And then this part as well I have to read because it's pretty important. But Johansen had not given out yet, knowing that the thing could surely overtake the alert until steam was fully up. He resolved on a desperate chance, and setting the engine for full speed, ran lightning-like on deck and reversed the wheel. There was a mighty eddying and foaming in the noisome brine, and as the steam mounted higher and higher, the brave Norwegian drove his vessel head-on against the pursuing jelly, which rose above the unclean froth like the stern of a demon galleon. The awful squidhead with riding feelers came nearly up to the bowsprit of the sturdy yacht, but Johansen drove on relentlessly. There was a bursting as of an exploding bladder, a slushy nastiness as of a cloven sunfish, a stench of 1,000 open graves, and a sound that the chronicler could not put on paper. For an instant the ship was befouled by an acrid and blinding green cloud, and then there was only a venomous seething astern, there where, God in heaven, the scattered plasticity of that nameless sky spawn was nebulously recombobulating in its hateful original form, whilst its distance withheld every second as the alert gained impetus from its mountaining steam. He rammed it. He fucking rammed the big fucking sky thing, which is kind of a cool concept. That, you know, the sailor himself, he's just a sailor. The sailors themselves are innocent humans that did nothing. By accident, the stars were right, and they have awoken this great big god that they in the end just had to deal with somehow. And only one person, Johansen, who got later killed, was the hero, the tragic hero, who actually rammed it and stopped it from unleashing its tendrils across the world. Another thing you might have noticed, I have a problem reading all of this. It's because the way he writes, always, the sentences are not modern. He writes these long ass sentences without punctuation, where they just go on a tangent, rambling, and I lose my breath, and I cannot, look for the fucking points, the dots. I cannot fucking wait for the end of a sentence to catch my breath. It's a shame, but it's part of what makes him what it is. So after reading the document, the protagonist is like, wow, I know way too much. At this point, he's a firm believer that he is gonna die. There is no other way. He's gonna go the same way Johansen and his uncle have gone before him. And he is ready to take that fate. And the story concludes with this. Who knows the end? What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. Loathsomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of men. A time will come, but I must not and cannot think. Let me pray that, if I do not survive this manuscript, my executors may put caution before audacity and see that it meets no other eye. He came to terms with it, that he's gonna die. He is faced with this idea that is worse than death, that there are other things that, the same way Cthulhu has risen, he may rise some other day, be it tomorrow, be it, and I don't know, it's worse than death. And he has gotten so, he just accepted it and says, I hope that nobody finds this manuscript I have written, because even if when I die, when the cult inevitably kills me, I'm gonna they're not gonna show it to anybody, because it's gonna happen one day. Cthulhu is gonna come back, and that's it. And that's it. So that was uh, my retelling to you of the story of the Call of Cthulhu. I really liked it. You cannot I trash talk it a lot, but I really like it. It's really original. The pacing in the book is really constant, which I like. There is no part that is like too much description. It's just about right. Enough description, enough like this and that and that. The pacing in it is fantastic. Where some of his other stuff from Lovecraft, the pacing is so disgusting. There's when he tries to paint a picture to you. For an example, the witch house, that one I forgot. I didn't read it till the end because I just got turned off by it. It was horrible. I didn't like it. The pacing in it was. He just describes this thing. There's nothing happening. Then there's like three things happening in like two sentences, and then there's this and that, and it's just confusing. I read complicated books as well. This one is not that complicated. It's just a little bit dated. Uh, but it's a good read. I'd recommend even. It actually took me now longer for me to explain the stuff I'm telling you than for you to actually read it because it's like an hour read. Or maybe you can just go listen to it on an audiobook and it's like an hour if. It's not that long. You can read it yourself. The magic comes from the reading in this one. What did I also want to talk about? Again, the racism. There are some parts. The book is really well written because everything ties in. So something that was mentioned in the everything has meaning. So something was mentioned in the first half of the book. It's gonna be mentioned in the second one just to tie into something else, and then it ties into something else, and then that really bothered me while making this review, while because I had to mention everything. There was no part I skipped a lot of it. I filtered a lot of it out, but I try to be as detailed as possible. But if I would be detailed as possible, I would be sitting here just rewriting the book. I could be just, reading the book to you. But that's it. Again, the racism is horrible. I'm not gonna mention that again. I'm gonna do another review of his stuff, and the next one I'm gonna be doing is, I'm pretty sure, the Dunwich Horror. Just let me see. Yeah, the horror from Dunwich Horror, which is for me a better read than this. So I hope you enjoyed this. I'm gonna put this book here for now as well. I'm gonna make more of these because I really like doing them, especially just rereading the old stuff and writing down scripts and everything and recording. It was really fun, but it takes a long time to make this because this is not like a movie review where I just sit down for 2 hours and watch a movie and then write the script and just comment it. Here I have to read an entire book, and while I'm reading it, I have to, write, which is, I have to read it twice actually. Once personally, and then when I decide it's okay to write a review on it, I have to read it again. But that's it. I hope you enjoyed the video. And next time, I'm gonna see, maybe I could put in Rats in the Walls as well. I'll see. Thanks for watching.